Watch this person carefully. Notice how they're sitting, leaning slightly forward, hands clasped together, making direct eye contact but blinking more frequently than normal. Their voice has a slight upward inflection at the end of statements, turning them into questions. They're nodding along with everything you say, perhaps a bit too enthusiastically. What can you tell about this person's psychological state? Are they confident or insecure, honest or deceptive, interested or just being polite? Most people would guess randomly, but someone trained in psychological profiling could tell you with 85% accuracy that this person is experiencing anxiety, seeking approval, and likely being less than completely honest about something. How is this possible? Because human behavior follows predictable patterns, and these patterns reveal the psychological processes happening beneath the surface. Dr. Paul Ekman's research on microexpression shows that we leak information about our internal states through hundreds of subtle behavioral cues that most people never notice. But here's what's really fascinating. The ability to read people accurately isn't a mystical gift or innate talent. It's a learnable skill based on scientific principles from psychology, neuroscience, and behavioral analysis. The same techniques used by FBI profilers, CIA interrogators, and clinical psychologists can be learned by anyone willing to understand how human psychology manifests in observable behavior. Today, I'm going to teach you the exact system that law enforcement and intelligence agencies use to create psychological profiles. You'll learn to identify personality types, detect deception, recognize emotional states, and predict behavior with remarkable accuracy. But more importantly, you'll understand the psychological principles that make this possible. But first, let me ask you something. How much more effective would you be in your relationships, career, and daily interactions if you could accurately read what people are really thinking and feeling beneath their social masks? Before we dive into the techniques, I need you to understand why this skill is so crucial in the modern world. We're living in an age of unprecedented deception and social performance, where the ability to see through facades isn't just useful, it's essential for survival and success. Dr. Bella DePaulo's research at the University of Virginia found that the average person encounters 200 lies per day. That's one lie every 4 minutes during waking hours. Most of these are small social lies, but some are significant deceptions that could impact your relationships, career, or financial well-being. Meanwhile, social media has created what Dr. Sherry Turkle calls the culture of performance, where everyone is constantly curating their image and hiding their authentic selves. The gap between people's public personas and private realities has never been larger, making it harder than ever to know who you're really dealing with. But the stakes go beyond just detecting deception. Dr. Daniel Goleman's research on emotional intelligence shows that people who can accurately read others' emotions and motivations are more successful in virtually every area of life. They build better relationships, advance faster in their careers, and make better decisions because they have more accurate information about the people around them. Consider the cost of misreading people, hiring the wrong employee, trusting the wrong business partner, missing the signs that a relationship is in trouble, or failing to recognize when someone needs help. These mistakes can cost you thousands of dollars, years of your life, and enormous emotional pain. On the flip side, consider the benefits of reading people accurately. Identifying the most trustworthy people to build relationships with, recognizing when someone is genuinely interested versus just being polite, detecting when someone is struggling and needs support, or knowing when someone is trying to manipulate or deceive you. The ability to read people isn't about gaining an unfair advantage or manipulating others. It's about seeing reality clearly so you can respond appropriately, build authentic connections, and protect yourself from those who might take advantage of your trust. To read people accurately, you need to understand the scientific principles that govern human behavior. Most people think behavior is random or unpredictable, but psychological research shows that human actions follow consistent patterns based on underlying mental and emotional processes. The behavioral iceberg model. Dr. Sigmund Freud's iceberg model of consciousness provides the foundation for understanding human behavior. What you see, someone's words and actions, represents only about 10% of what's actually happening psychologically. The other 90% consists of unconscious thoughts, emotions, motivations, and conflicts that drive behavior but remain hidden from conscious awareness. This is why people often can't explain their own behavior accurately. They're not lying, they genuinely don't understand their own unconscious motivations. But these unconscious processes leak through micro-expressions, body language, vocal patterns, and behavioral choices that trained observers can detect and interpret. Dr. Malcolm Gladwell's research on thin slicing shows that people can make remarkably accurate judgments about others based on very brief observations, sometimes as little as 30 seconds. But this only works when you know what to look for and how to interpret what you're seeing. The stress response system. Dr. Hans Sellier's research on stress shows that all human behavior can be understood through the lens of stress and coping. When people feel safe and relaxed, they behave authentically. When they feel threatened or stressed, they activate psychological defense mechanisms that change their behavior in predictable ways. The key insight is that stress doesn't just come from external threats, it also comes from internal conflicts. When someone's public behavior conflicts with their private thoughts, when they're trying to hide something, or when they're uncertain about how to respond to a situation. These internal stress states create what Dr. Joe Navarro calls behavioral clusters, groups of behaviors that consistently appear together when someone is experiencing specific psychological states. Learning to recognize these clusters is the foundation of accurate people reading. The baseline principle. Dr. Paul Ekman's research on deception detection emphasizes the importance of establishing behavioral baselines. Everyone has unique behavioral patterns when they're relaxed and comfortable. Deviations from these baseline patterns indicate psychological stress, which could signal deception, anxiety, attraction, or other significant emotional states. This is why first impressions can be misleading. You're seeing someone's behavior in a specific context, but you don't know their normal patterns. Accurate people reading requires observing someone across multiple contexts and situations to understand their baseline behavior. The congruence principle. Dr. Albert Mehrabian's research on communication shows that human communication operates on 3 levels: verbal, words, vocal, tone, pace, volume, and visual, body language, facial expressions. When these 3 levels are congruent, all sending the same message, the person is likely being authentic. When they're incongruent, it indicates internal conflict or deception. For example, someone might say, "I'm fine," verbal, in a tight, strained voice, vocal, while crossing their arms and avoiding eye contact, visual. The incongruence between these levels reveals that they're not actually fine, regardless of what they're saying. The cognitive load theory. Dr. Daniel Kahneman's research on cognitive processing shows that deception and emotional suppression require significant mental energy. When people are lying, hiding emotions, or trying to control their behavior, they experience what psychologists call cognitive load. Their mental resources become depleted. This cognitive load manifests in observable behaviors: decreased eye contact, longer response times, simplified language, reduced gesturing, and increased self-soothing behaviors. These signs don't necessarily indicate deception, but they do indicate that someone is working harder mentally than usual. The emotional leakage principle. Dr. Paul Ekman's research on micro-expressions shows that genuine emotions are nearly impossible to suppress completely. Even when people are trying to hide their feelings, brief flashes of authentic emotion, lasting 1/25th of a second, leak through their facial expressions. These micro-expressions reveal what people are actually feeling beneath their controlled expressions. Someone might maintain a calm, professional demeanor, while micro-expressions of anger, fear, or disgust flash across their face, revealing their true emotional state. The behavioral adaptation principle. Dr. Robert Cialdini's research on influence shows that people unconsciously adapt their behavior to match their environment and the people around them. This adaptation follows predictable patterns based on psychological principles like reciprocity, social proof, and authority. Understanding these adaptation patterns helps you predict how people will behave in different situations and recognize when someone's behavior is genuine versus performed for social reasons. The personality expression principle. Dr. Lewis Goldberg's research on the Big Five personality traits shows that personality consistently expresses itself through behavior, even when people are trying to act differently. Extroverts can't completely suppress their sociability, conscientious people can't completely hide their attention to detail, and neurotic people can't completely mask their anxiety. Learning to recognize how different personality types express themselves behaviorally allows you to understand people's natural tendencies and predict their likely responses to different situations. The motivation hierarchy principle. Dr. Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs provides a framework for understanding what motivates people's behavior. People's actions are driven by their current level of need satisfaction: physiological, safety, belonging, esteem, or self-actualization. By observing someone's behavior patterns, you can often determine which level of needs they're currently focused on, which helps you understand their motivations and predict their future behavior. These scientific principles form the foundation of accurate people reading. They're not tricks or gimmicks. They're evidence-based insights into how human psychology manifests in observable behavior. Now that you understand the science, let me teach you the systematic approach that professionals use to create accurate psychological profiles. This system, developed by the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit, can be adapted for everyday social and professional situations. Step 1. Environmental assessment, the SEEN method. Before you can read someone accurately, you need to understand the context that's influencing their behavior. The SEEN method helps you assess environmental factors that might be affecting someone's psychological state. S. Social dynamics. Who else is present? What are the power relationships? Is this person trying to impress someone, avoid someone, or fit in with a group? Social context dramatically influences behavior, so you need to account for these pressures. C. Cultural factors. What cultural background does this person come from? Different cultures have different norms for eye contact, personal space, emotional expression, and social interaction. What seems like deception in one culture might be normal politeness in another. Emotional climate. What's the overall emotional tone of the situation? Is it tense, relaxed, formal, casual? People behave differently in different emotional environments, so you need to factor this into your assessment. N. Normative expectations. What behaviors are expected in this context? Someone might seem unusually quiet in a social setting, but perfectly normal in a professional meeting. You need to understand the behavioral norms for each situation. E. External stressors. Are there obvious external factors that might be affecting this person's behavior? Time pressure, physical discomfort, recent events, or other stressors can significantly impact how someone presents themselves. Step 2. Baseline establishment, the normal method. Once you understand the context, you need to establish this person's baseline behavior patterns. The normal method helps you identify their typical behavioral patterns when they're relaxed and comfortable. N. Natural posture. How does this person naturally hold their body when they're relaxed? Do they sit up straight or slouch? Do they gesture frequently or keep their hands still? Everyone has a natural posture that they return to when comfortable. O. Ordinary speech patterns. What's their normal pace, volume, and tone of voice? Do they speak quickly or slowly? Do they use lots of filler words or speak precisely? These patterns change when someone is stressed or deceptive. R. Regular facial expressions. What does their face look like in neutral moments? Some people naturally have more animated expressions while others are more controlled. You need to know their baseline to recognize deviations. M. Movement habits. How do they typically move and gesture? Some people are naturally fidgety, while others are very still. Some gesture frequently, while others rarely move their hands. These patterns are important for detecting changes. A. Attention patterns. Where do they typically look? Some people make lots of eye contact, while others naturally look away frequently. Some scan the environment constantly, while others focus intently on one thing. L. Language style. How do they typically express themselves? Do they use complex vocabulary or simple words? Do they speak in long sentences or short phrases? Do they use humor, ask questions, or make statements? Step 3. Deviation detection, the change method. Once you've established someone's baseline, you can begin detecting deviations that indicate psychological stress, deception, or significant emotional states. The change method helps you systematically identify these deviations. C. Contradictions. Look for inconsistencies between different behavioral channels. Are their words saying one thing while their body language says another? Are they claiming to be calm while showing signs of agitation? H. Hesitations. Notice unusual pauses, delays, or interruptions in their normal flow of behavior. These often indicate internal conflict or the need to carefully consider their response. A. Amplifications. Watch for behaviors that become more intense than usual. Someone who normally gestures moderately might start gesturing dramatically when stressed or deceptive. N. New behaviors. Look for behaviors that weren't present in their baseline. New self-soothing behaviors, different postures, or unusual speech patterns often indicate psychological stress. G. Gaps. Notice what's missing from their normal behavioral repertoire. Someone who usually makes eye contact but suddenly stops, or someone who typically gestures but becomes very still. E. Extremes. Watch for behaviors that go to unusual extremes. Too much eye contact, overly animated expressions, excessive stillness, or unusually formal language. Step 4. Pattern recognition, the CLUSTER method. Individual behavioral changes can be misleading, but clusters of related behaviors are much more reliable indicators of psychological states. The cluster method helps you identify meaningful behavioral patterns. C. Consistency. Look for multiple behaviors that all point in the same direction. If someone shows 3 different signs of anxiety, it's much more reliable than one isolated sign. L. Location. Notice where behavioral changes are concentrated. Changes in facial expressions might indicate emotional stress, while changes in body posture might indicate physical discomfort or social anxiety. U. Universality. Look for behaviors that are consistent across different contexts. If someone shows the same stress signs in multiple situations, it's more likely to be meaningful than context-specific behavior. S. Sequence. Pay attention to the order in which behaviors appear. Certain behavioral sequences are characteristic of specific psychological states or personality types. T. Timing. Notice when behavioral changes occur. Do they happen when certain topics are mentioned, when specific people arrive, or at particular times during the interaction? E. Escalation. Watch for behavioral patterns that build over time. Gradual increases in stress behaviors often indicate mounting psychological pressure. R. Recovery. Observe how quickly someone returns to baseline after a behavioral deviation. Quick recovery might indicate temporary stress, while slow recovery might indicate deeper issues. Step 5. Psychological inference, the profile method. The final step involves using your behavioral observations to make educated inferences about someone's psychological state, personality, and likely future behavior. The profile method provides a framework for this analysis. P. Personality assessment. Based on their behavioral patterns, what can you infer about their personality type? Are they introverted or extroverted, anxious or confident, detail-oriented or big-picture focused? R. Relationship dynamics. How does this person typically relate to others? Are they dominant or submissive, cooperative or competitive, trusting or suspicious? O. Operational style. How does this person approach tasks and decisions? Are they methodical or impulsive, risk-averse or risk-seeking, independent or collaborative? F. Fundamental motivations. What seems to drive this person's behavior? Are they motivated by achievement, security, recognition, autonomy, or something else? I. Internal conflicts. What tensions or contradictions do you notice in their behavior? Are they trying to appear confident while feeling insecure? Trying to be helpful while feeling resentful? L. Likely responses. Based on your assessment, how is this person likely to respond to different situations, requests, or approaches? What communication style would be most effective with them? E. Emotional state. What is this person's current emotional condition? Are they stressed, excited, worried, angry, or something else? How might this affect their decision-making and behavior? This systematic approach takes practice to master, but it provides a reliable framework for reading people accurately. The key is to remain objective, look for patterns rather than isolated behaviors, and always consider alternative explanations for what you're observing. Now that you understand the basic profiling system, let me teach you some advanced techniques that professionals use to gain deeper insights into people's psychology and predict their behavior with remarkable accuracy. Micro-expression reading. Dr. Paul Ekman's research identified 7 universal facial expressions that appear across all cultures: happiness, sadness, anger, fear, surprise, disgust, and contempt. These expressions often flash across people's faces for 1/25th of a second before they can control them. Learning to spot these micro-expressions requires training your eye to notice subtle facial movements. Happiness micro-expressions involve genuine eye crinkling, Duchenne markers, not just mouth movements. Anger micro-expressions show lowered brows and tightened lips. Fear micro-expressions involve raised upper eyelids and dropped jaw. The key is to watch for expressions that don't match what someone is saying or the emotion they're trying to project. A micro-expression of disgust, while someone is saying they're excited about an opportunity, reveals their true feelings about the situation. Vocal pattern analysis. Dr. Judy Burgoon's research on deception detection shows that vocal patterns are often more reliable than visual cues for detecting psychological states. People can control their facial expressions more easily than their vocal patterns. Listen for changes in pitch, pace, volume, and vocal quality. Stress typically raises vocal pitch, while deception often involves slower speech as people carefully consider their words. Genuine emotion usually involves natural vocal variation, while controlled emotion sounds more monotone. Pay attention to speech patterns, increased use of filler words, like, longer pauses before responding, more formal language than usual, or sudden changes in vocabulary complexity. These often indicate cognitive load or emotional stress. Proxemics and spatial behavior. Dr. Edward T. Hall's research on proxemics shows that how people use space reveals important information about their psychological state and relationship dynamics. Notice how close people stand to others, how they orient their bodies, and how they claim or avoid territory. Someone who usually maintains close proximity but suddenly creates distance might be experiencing conflict or discomfort. Someone who typically respects personal space but moves closer might be seeking connection or trying to establish dominance. Watch for territorial behaviors, how people arrange objects around them, where they choose to sit, and how they respond when others enter their space. These behaviors reveal personality traits and current emotional states. Gesture cluster analysis. Dr. Joe Navarro's research on nonverbal communication shows that gestures occur in meaningful clusters that reveal psychological states. Individual gestures can be misleading, but clusters of related gestures are highly reliable. Self-soothing gesture clusters include touching the face, neck, or hair, adjusting clothing, or fidgeting with objects. These indicate stress, anxiety, or discomfort. Blocking gesture clusters involve crossing arms, turning away, or placing objects between themselves and others, indicating psychological barriers or defensiveness. Dominance gesture clusters include expansive postures, pointing gestures, and claiming more space. Submission clusters involve making oneself smaller, avoiding eye contact, and deferential postures. Linguistic pattern recognition. Dr. James Pennebaker's research on linguistic analysis shows that word choice reveals personality traits and psychological states with remarkable accuracy. People unconsciously choose words that reflect their mental processes. Listen for pronoun usage. People who use I frequently are often more self-focused, while those who use we are more collaborative. People avoiding responsibility often use passive voice or third-person references. Notice temporal language. People focused on the past might be depressed or nostalgic, while those focused on the future might be anxious or optimistic. Present-focused language often indicates mindfulness or immediate concerns. Pay attention to emotional language. The specific emotions people mention and how they describe feelings reveals their emotional intelligence and current psychological state. Behavioral prediction modeling. Dr. Robert Hare's research on psychopathy and Dr. John Gottman's research on relationship dynamics show that certain behavioral patterns reliably predict future behavior. Look for consistency patterns. People who are reliable in small things are usually reliable in big things. People who show integrity in low-stakes situations usually maintain it in high-stakes situations. Notice stress response patterns. How someone handles minor frustrations predicts how they'll handle major challenges. Someone who becomes aggressive over small issues will likely escalate under greater pressure. Watch decision-making patterns. People who make impulsive decisions in some areas often do so in others. People who carefully consider options usually maintain this pattern across different domains. Deception detection mastery. Dr. Aldert Vrai's research on deception shows that detecting lies requires looking for cognitive load indicators rather than traditional tells, like avoiding eye contact. Look for increased cognitive effort, longer response times, simplified language, fewer details, and reduced gesturing. Liars often provide fewer sensory details and less emotional content in their stories. Watch for story inconsistencies. Truthful people can tell their story in different orders and add details when asked. Deceptive people often stick rigidly to their prepared narrative and become confused when asked to tell it differently. Notice emotional incongruence. The emotions someone displays should match the content of what they're saying. Inappropriate emotional responses often indicate deception or psychological disturbance. Integration and calibration. The key to mastering these advanced techniques is integration, using multiple channels of information simultaneously rather than relying on any single indicator. Cross-reference what you're seeing in facial expressions with vocal patterns, body language, and linguistic choices. Always calibrate your observations against the person's baseline behavior and the current context. What seems like deception might just be nervousness, and what seems like confidence might be overcompensation for insecurity. Practice these techniques in low-stakes situations first: casual conversations, social gatherings, or professional meetings where you can observe without pressure. As you develop your skills, you'll begin to see patterns that were invisible before. Before we conclude, I need to address the ethical implications of reading people accurately. With great power comes great responsibility, and the ability to see through people's facades must be used wisely and ethically. The principle of benevolent intent. The most important ethical guideline is to use your people reading skills for benevolent purposes. This means using your insights to build better relationships, provide appropriate support, protect yourself from harm, and help others when possible. Never use these skills to manipulate, exploit, or harm others. The goal is to understand people better so you can interact with them more effectively and authentically, not to gain unfair advantages or control over them. The principle of contextual respect. Remember that everyone has reasons for their behavior, even when that behavior seems irrational or deceptive. Someone who appears to be lying might be protecting themselves from judgment, trying to avoid hurting someone's feelings, or dealing with personal struggles you can't see. Use your insights to respond with appropriate compassion and understanding, rather than judgment or confrontation. Sometimes the most ethical response to detecting someone's distress is to give them space or offer support, not to call them out on their behavior. The principle of confidential observation. Keep your observations to yourself unless sharing them serves a legitimate protective purpose. Don't gossip about people's psychological states or use your insights to embarrass or expose others. If you detect that someone is struggling emotionally, consider whether there's an appropriate way to offer support without revealing that you've been analyzing their behavior. The principle of humble accuracy. Remember that people reading is a skill, not a superpower. You will make mistakes, misinterpret behaviors, and jump to incorrect conclusions. Maintain intellectual humility and be willing to revise your assessments when you get new information. Never assume that your initial read of someone is completely accurate. People are complex, and behavior can be influenced by factors you're not aware of. Use your insights as hypotheses to be tested, not as definitive judgments. The ability to read people accurately is a powerful tool that can dramatically improve your relationships, career success, and personal safety. But like any powerful tool, it must be used responsibly and ethically. When you can see past people's social masks to understand their authentic selves, you become capable of deeper connections, more effective communication, and better decision-making. You can offer support to those who need it, protect yourself from those who might harm you, and build relationships based on genuine understanding rather than surface impressions. The techniques I've shared today are based on decades of scientific research and have been tested in the highest stakes situations imaginable. They work when applied systematically and ethically. Your enhanced ability to understand human psychology is waiting for you to develop it. The question is, are you ready to see people as they really are?